We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. This week, we learned about the morning routine of a certain member of royalty. Breakfast in bed, an hour-long bath, a vodka pick-me-up, as the Levenseys. I don't know about Princess Margaret, sounds like Her Majesty Rachel Johnson to me. Coming up on the programme, Michelle thinks robots are threatening our jobs. Nick demands less privileges for our prisoners. Rachel says the government should stop dilly-dallying over a Brexit deal. And Afua makes a shocking admission. But first, it's me. I make no apology for what I'm about to tell you about ISIS. About how they rape and torture women and many children, many as young as 8, how they bury children alive, crucify them, use them as suicide bombers, how they hack men's heads off, how they burn them in cages, all in the name of religion. Yet Max Hill QC, the independent reviewer of our terror laws, reckons jihadis returning to Britain shouldn't be prosecuted because some are, quote, naive, disillusioned teenagers. No, they're not. They're heartless killers who made a commitment to murder, maim and destroy the West. If we must take them back, we should confiscate their passports and prosecute them as the terrorists they are. The SOFAN Centre, which studies security around the world, says returnees, 5,600 from 33 countries, will present a global threat for decades to come. The only naive people here are those who think you can rehabilitate murderers prepared to die for their twisted Islamist ideology. I don't actually care what happens to them. I just don't want them here on our streets, poisoning young minds and killing our kids.
Oh, Carole, well, I was really hoping that this wouldn't be a debate about whether ISIS is bad or not, because I think we all agree that they are despicable and that the crimes that they've been carrying out are horrific. And I can't imagine anyone would disagree with that. But it's all right for you to say you don't care what happens to the people who join, but unfortunately there are people in this country whose job it is to care what happens to them. We have to deal with the people who are coming back. So the number that I've got here is about 800.
Why do we have to deal with them? Why are we letting them come back in the first place?
Because they're British citizens. And some of them are coming back.
British citizens who left this country to kill children, to murder and maim. And why are we letting them back? They don't deserve to come back.
So you think we should outsource our responsibility and let someone else deal with the problem?
I don't care what happens to them, like I said in the intro. I don't care what happens to them. I just don't want them back here because they're killers. They have no mercy. You know, ISIS, their savagery knows no bounds. They're inhuman. What they have done to people and to children is inhuman.
Like I said, we all agree about that.
So fine. So why do you want them in this country? Why do you want them on our streets? Because they get sent to prison when they come back for piddling amounts of time, and then they're released back onto the streets. Do you really think that a little de-radicalisation programme in prison, which is not compulsory, by the way, they can take it or not, do you really think that's going to sort them out and they're going to be good citizens and go work in Tesco's or serve burgers? They're not.
I don't think what you're saying is realistic or constructive. I think we would all like for people not to have left Britain to join in the first place, and we would like it even more if ISIS didn't exist.
So all the experts
and weren't committing the horrific acts. But this isn't a constructive conversation. The reality is people are coming back. Some are coming back actually using their British passports, and it's not being detected that they went off to join ISIS until they're here. So once they're here, there is nothing you can do. Now, the quote that you're using from Max Hill, the independent reviewer of terrorism, I find it misleading, I have to say, because what he's saying is we have a criminal justice system in this country that reviews people, and when they've been involved in terrorism, reviews them very, very carefully. And the reason why some of them are not being prosecuted is because they couldn't make a case.
So the organisations reviewing them will be our intelligence services. They'd be like the intelligence service that Andrew Parker said last week had never been under a bigger threat than they are now. And you talk about this guy Hill. His predecessor, a guy called David Anderson, said that returning jihadis were the single biggest threat to this country and would remain so for decades to come.
Well, I'd like other people to come in, but I think there's a lot of confusion in what you're saying, because the threat...
There's no confusion in what I'm saying,
No, there is, because the domestic threat to terrorism is not necessarily coming from people who have been fighting abroad. And the former director of counter-terrorism for MI5 has said, actually, the bigger threat to domestic terrorism in the UK is not...
You never want to focus on Islamic terrorism and Islamist terrorism, no? You never want to focus on it. I can't even have this conversation with you because you're not engaging with the issue, Carole. I am. I'm absolutely engaging with the issue.
Let's just hear what the current MI5 Director General, Andrew Parker, had to say about this.
We're now running well over 500 live operations involving around 3,000 individuals known to be currently involved in extremist activity in some way. as well as those we're looking at today, risk can also come from returnees from Syria and Iraq, and also the growing pool of over 20,000 individuals that we've looked at in the past in our terrorism investigations.
Now, pretty unprecedented that a Director General in that position would even give a speech, and the numbers that he shared, wholly unprecedented. Where I think you're both right. Afua, of course, no one is going to defend what ISIS did. Absolutely. So let's park that. We all agree it is a barbarous, medieval death cult who needs to be defeated. And I agree with you, by the way, the fact that they're going to wander in and they're deemed to possibly be naive is wrong either. So I ask, what happened in 2014? Then Prime Minister David Cameron brought in something called TEOs, Temporary Exclusion Orders, which were designed to deal with this. And if I have run off from Blackburn or Luton or Stevenage or whatever and I've gone to fight twice, I'm actually stopped at the border and then I'm taken into detention for a maximum period of 2 years while they assess whether I could pose a threat. Now, this was one of, to quote Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, this is one of the parts of the toolbox to defeat terrorism. Why, when these people are arriving, why are they not being given TEOs, temporary exclusion orders? I don't mean throw them in a detention camp, put them in a perfectly reasonable centre, work with them and assess the level of threat that they pose. And then lastly, another former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, diluted the Treason Act to a point where it is absolutely worse. The guts have been kicked out of it. I think there's an argument that we calmly and soberly, we look at the current treason legislation. And now I would have to effectively try and murder the Queen or Prince Philip to have any chance of being done for treason. We reassess that. If you've chosen to go and fight against a clear enemy like ISIS, we look at a possible prosecution under a new Treason Act. That's where I would go.
You say we've got to assess the threat they pose. We know the threat they pose.
Some of them will be real low level.
They massacred, raped and beheaded their way across 2 countries.
Carole, what makes you think you understand the threat that individuals
What makes you
pose
understand?
better
What makes you think you understand about the head of MI5?
Terrorism at MI5 than the former.
Well, the head of MI5 just said they're a huge danger.
If you listen to someone like Keir Starmer, who was director of public prosecution,
I'm going to listen to Keir Starmer instead of the head of MI5.
Who was the director of public prosecution, he will tell you that nothing in our current legal system is preventing them from processing people who pose a threat. We're not using exclusion orders anymore, but we are using
Did you see the
TEOs.
story today that said that the prosecution service, the CPS, don't have enough prosecutors to prosecute terrorists? They said that today.
As we know, we talk about it almost every week, our criminal justice system is...
Did you hear that?
They
don't have enough people to prosecute the terrorists that are coming back
If you
here.
are saying that we need to increase resources so that we process people properly, so that we remain safe,
I'm saying we should prosecute them. Why are we just assessing them? They went to murder and kill. They knew what ISIS was about before. Are you actually saying they didn't know what they were joining? Seriously?
Did you hear me say that?
You shocked your head when I said they knew.
Did anybody hear me say that?
Well, you're always just rolling around, so I never know quite what you're doing. Anyway.
The description of these people being naive, I think, is completely wrong. I don't think these people are naive at all. I think that they go with full information about what they're going to find when they get there. At least they think that's what they have. So they go with a real intention. I think what maybe happens when they get there is they realise actually just how bad the situation is and they can't hack it. Or they're coming back because actually they're so energised by what they're hearing, they want to come home and actually do something about it on British soil instead. So I completely dispute the label that these people are naive. I don't think that they are at all.
I think Carole has a point, though. They can't be allowed to use their rights as British citizens to come back boo-hooing to mummy after having had the intention to go off and throw gays off tall buildings and rape and pillage all their way around the Middle East.
And actually, on that note, it might be a moment, just sorry to interrupt you, just to show we've got a quick clip of somebody who did go to fight explaining why he did want to come back.
At the end of the day, I'm just trying to get my life back. If it so be it that I have to go to prison in order to do that, and I'm prepared to do that. Like I said, I'm not here to harm anybody. I'm just here to look after my family and live my life.
So how many lives did he take, I wonder? He wants his life back. How many lives did he take?
But Rory Stewart, the MP, who's actually spent an enormous amount of time in Afghanistan and Pakistan and has lived with these people, says that the most sensible thing to do is, I mean, I gasped when I heard this, was actually shoot them on the battlefield to kill them before they return. He said it's basically the only way you can deal with it, especially given the extreme form of radicalisation.
You're right.
Well, can we just see what Rory Stewart MP said? He said They believe in an extremely hateful doctrine which involves killing themselves, killing others, and trying to use violence and brutality to create an 8th century or 7th century state. We have to be serious about the fact these people are a serious danger to us, and unfortunately the only way of dealing with them will be, in almost every case, to kill them.
Yes.
So, you know, that's quite radical, isn't it, Carole?
Radical, but, you know, but the thing is, we don't have the time or the resources to make these people into decent human beings.
It's also probably not legal. It's also probably not illegal. Course of action.
He did clarify his comments to say that he wasn't advocating anything that's not in line with the law. And
he means in war, kill them in war, not line them up.
Sorry, Michelle, I didn't mean to cut you off. But all I want to say is that we fought and worked very hard over centuries to build the society we have today.
Yeah.
This is a complicated situation. I've spoken to people who've come back from Syria. There are a number of ways people end up there. Some of them go to help with humanitarian causes and end up with ISIS. Some of them go to kill people. Yes. There is a range of factors. Now, we have a system that is sophisticated enough to take people on their individual case and deal with them accordingly. And when you talk about just throwing the whole thing away and shooting them all, for example, that worries me, Carole.
don't have the resources. They're watching 30,000 closely now, and you want another 450 to be looked at as well. We don't have the money to make them into decent people again.
Is the world a safer place if they are penned in the Middle East, or if they come back and are treated in this triage system?
But truthfully, I don't believe you can treat them. I think when they've been radicalised to that extent, I don't believe there's a way back. They're members of a caliphate that want to destroy the West, and I very much doubt.
Do you just bolt the door, Carole?
On them,
but where do they go?
Well, I don't care. Seriously, Nick, I don't care.
It's like out of sight, out of mind, but it doesn't mean they're not going to do what they do anyway.
But the thing is,
whether they do it there or here.
Yeah, that's true.
Michelle's been waiting.
But I wait patiently.
Sorry,
you going to let me speak.
You go.
So my point is that everyone's describing these people as British citizens, which they started off as being, but at what point do you lose your right to be a British citizen? Because if you're somebody who hates who we are as a country, the values that we have, the tolerance levels that we have, at what point do you just say, well, don't worry, you can hear everything about us, but hey, you're still welcome and we'll still regard you as a British citizen? Because to me, there must surely be a cut-off point. There must be.
But there is. The government is already using prerogative powers to strip dual nationals of their British citizenship if they've gone to join ISIS. So that I don't recognise this picture that we just open the floodgates, say, come back, don't worry, we won't send you to jail, you can just blow us up instead. That is not what is happening.
We don't have a mindset of dealing with terrorism. This guy, Hill, said he didn't want the new laws that Theresa May is about to bring in. He didn't want those to apply to people unless they had actually attempted or committed an atrocity. It's too late then. People are dead. You can't wait until they've committed the atrocity to send them to prison. You've got to do something beforehand.
Sorry, we've got to go from the frying pan into the fire because it's my turn to return to the sunlit uplands. Shambolic. Screwed. Not my words, but those of the former Shadow Europe Minister and the former UK Ambassador to the EU, after the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, said MPs wouldn't get to vote on the deal until after the UK leaves. Number 10 slapped him down. His own department had to clarify his statement. It did not look good. It made former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg's verdict that Brexit was the stupidest decision any country has made until the US trumped them seem only too kind. Business is understandably beginning to panic. They have to move fast. They have to plan and make decisions, but they can't. The uncertainty is killing the vital financial services sector, and they are already voting with their feet, activating plans to move abroad. And can you blame them? They can't stall in neutral forever. They can't wait around for an indefinite transition period, perhaps followed by a cliff edge. We need a deal in the next few months before companies up sticks and scarper across the globe. I don't think that's what global Britain was meant to mean.
So I agree with you in the sense that we need to create certainty as soon as possible. So I think it was absolutely disgraceful that no proper thought was put into the prospect of Brexit whilst we was having this referendum period. It seems to me like nobody in power actually thought that Brexit would happen, and there was no planning at all for what that might look like. The fact we took so long to implement Article 50 was just utterly bizarre. And this whole thing is dragging out. I get very concerned that we've not been able to move on to trade talks yet, purely because it seems that we're so hung up about how much money the EU is going to receive. I think it is ridiculous that they are stalling the talk so strongly based on that money. I also sympathise with business to the point of course, they need to understand the trading conditions to plan for the future things. But I also think a lot of businesses use Brexit as an excuse. So I remember, you know, literally about a month or so after the referendum, one of the big key banks came out and announced a redundancy programme and blamed it on Brexit uncertainty. It wasn't true. That was a part of an ongoing efficiency drive that a business was doing. I could name the bank, but I weren't. So people often use Brexit as a way of burying bad news and blaming poor performance. Okay. A lot of other people will have a lack of certain sympathy with the financial services because they didn't care too much about the impact on ordinary people when they contributed to the crash in 2008. But what I would say is, as my final point, we need to focus on, there's going to be so many changes to the economy in terms of technology and stuff, and we're focusing so much on how do we keep business as it is today, post-Brexit. We need to be focusing about what do we want our economy to look like post-Brexit, where are the new opportunities, and how can we innovate as well? You look confused.
Michelle, no, I think we've got to deal slightly with a more immediate problem, which is that financial services, which is 11% of the GDP, is voting with its feet, and most banks are already planning to move between 15 and 25% of their workforce to support. If you don't mind a 10-year,
but it makes sense that
years of austerity, then that's fine. All I'm arguing for is that David Davis actually gives and Theresa May together don't leave business in the dark. Now, I'm not being particularly ideological. I'm being pragmatic. This is we all have to live and work in this country, Carole. It's not.
I get it. No, I
it's
get
like
it.
believing in Father Christmas.
You're saying that business
now.
is suffering. No, it isn't. There's 306 business leaders wrote to the Daily Telegraph. Let me read.
That was in 2016, before the referendum, and they still haven't had any clarity and certainty.
No, it wasn't. Well, what they said was it was Britain's competitiveness is being undermined by our membership of a failing EU.
That was May 2016.
So what? They don't want to be in it.
That was before the referendum. And what we're talking about now, Carole.
So let's talk about the financial. Let's talk about the financial services that you're talking about now. You're saying that banks are preparing to move people to Europe. They have to move some people to Europe because we're not going to be in Europe anymore. So those banks have to have a presence there. But no one is leaving this country, Rachel. If you move a little percentage of your workforce, you're not leaving. In terms of the city. The city is we're the number one in the world, and we will remain.
Good. No, I hope so.
We will
Carole.
remain there.
I seriously hope you're right.
Okay, well let me talk. There are assets that we can never lose. We can't lose the language. We can't lose the time zone. We have an unrivaled pool of talent in the city. They're going nowhere. And the businesses, what businesses are you talking about?
What about Lloyd Blankfein, the head of Goldman Sachs, who said he was going to spend much more time?
What about Deutsche Bank, who actually said...
Can I just do a very quick Father Christmas, sorry to any viewers who are surprised, myth-busting. These figures don't lie.
English.
So this is GDP growth in 2016.
Okay.
UK had the highest rate of GDP growth in the OECD.
Yeah.
2017, we've slipped to fourth place, and we are the only ones whose growth has actually fallen. Now, I know there are lots of competing statistics about how we are doing, but that doesn't lie.
We've had five. I want to correct that. We've had 5 consecutive quarters of growth. We've done a 1.9% growth in the last 12 months. That's more than was predicted and more was expected.
All pointing out was when the EU has been fantastic for us in terms of growth, but now we are bottom of the growth league. But that's fine.
1.9%.
Yes, hello, Nick. Hello.
If they hadn't voted Brexit, you'd have nothing to bloody well talk about. All you ever... When I get the briefing notes, I get Michelle, I get Afua, Rachel, Brexit, every bloody week. Now, let's put this in context. You quote Michael Bloomberg. And I was fortunate enough to spend time with Michael Bloomberg this week when he opened his £1 billion offices by the Mansion House in the City of London. And he's right. But again, that's been taken quite out of context because he said the same thing to me. But he said this. The idea everybody's going to chase off to Frankfurt from the city is ridiculous. The population of Frankfurt equals the population of the London borough of Croydon. That's the whole thing. And as Carole rightly says, there's a bit, but there's not a lot of English spoken. English is the language of the city. So as Michael Bloomberg says, I'm quoting, is London going to take a knock? Yes, it will take a knock. But will it have the drive and the means? Yes. Why do you suppose he's built offices that currently can take 4,000 staff, that will take 4,000?
When do you think he took the decision?
No, hold on. And he's built it. There will now be 1,000
No,
staff.
I think it's
This is an
great.
extraordinarily global, nimble person. If he really thought the writing was on the wall for London, and I don't blame him, he'd be out of there. He'd have pulled the plug on it. There are tough times. Of course there are tough times. This is not going to be a slam dunk. I don't think anybody ever said it was going to be a slam dunk.
No, it's not. Can we just pause and hear what Carole Fairbairn, the Director General of the CBI, has to say?
It is very difficult running a business right now. And I think there are two things. One is the uncertainty of not knowing the final outcome. But secondly, the fear that the final outcome might be WTO terms, because that does mean 22% tariffs on food. That does mean that services firms don't have access to the European Union and vice versa. So these are real challenges for firms today. And I think what we're increasingly seeing is that they're making decisions now that are affecting investment, that's affecting jobs. So it's very urgent.
So what she's saying is, because Article 50, we've only got 17 months left, there is every likelihood that the deal will time out. We will leave the EU possibly without one, let alone having MPs able to vote on the deal, because there won't have been a deal by the time we leave, which means that our very, very strong services sector will not be able to trade in Europe because WTO does not
They can trade
apply to services.
Yes,
Meanwhile, goods will have tariffs of 22%.
Is it just like I'm not
so
here?
It's not going to be brilliant.
We can trade with WTO immediately. The WTO released a statement at the end of last year saying there will be no disruption. We can trade the nanosecond that we leave the EU. They made that statement. We're members of the WTO. We're one of the founding members.
Do you really think that would be a good outcome?
Yes, I do. I do. Yeah.
I want to say a couple of things. So first of all, there's not a full single market for the services economy at the moment anyway, so that they're talking about that. Also, as well, she represents the CBI and they take an element of their funding from the European Union as well. So I'm always a little bit cautious about listening to the representatives of business groups. There are lots of businesses that will be very happy to see a release, for example, of a lot of the red tape. I was earlier on in a stockroom.
That will happen if we didn't have the EU withdrawal bill, which is another possibility, which incorporates our red tape.
I was hanging around in a stockroom with two young men earlier on.
Oh, not again. Here I am. You can't see the young men because they're behind the camera. But do you know what that paper represents? I shall tell you if you don't.
Love letters to you.
Yes. How did you know? Is everyone queuing up, trying to get on a date with me? I've not had time to open them. I apologise.
Red tape. What is it?
It's basically, there's so much EU law, this is according to Professor Tim Congdon, that it would fill 120,000 pages of A4, which is what I'm seated comfortably upon there. So there's a lot of businesses that actually
I know, but Michelle, you're arguing against yourself because the EU withdrawal bill incorporates all this red tape, and it's up to ministers, as we know, to strike it out using their Henry VIII clauses. Anyway, Afua.
I was just going to say, there is a lot of EU law, but that's the reality of doing business in a global marketplace.
For 40 years.
If we leave the EU, we will, as you pointed out, replace it with more laws that we're going to have to make bilaterally with different countries. The idea that we can just rip up the laws, have this clean slate and do what we like. This is the fantasy that is being peddled to people.
And it's very
ironic that a Conservative government, the party of business, is peddling this, because it's businesses that are going to suffer.
Do you really think other countries are going to stop doing business with us?
Do you really think that you're going to escape from red tape when you're going to have 10... It's going to probably take 10 years to untangle it.
Well,
so might as well just let it go.
You say this every time. How is it going to take 10 years?
I'm so bored of Brexit conversation. So, moving on. This week, I've been joined by the Facebook founder, Mark Zuckerberg, the Tesla and SpaceX pioneer, Elon Musk, and Richard Branson. Not in reality, of course, but in my thoughts. They've all called for us to consider UBI, Universal Basic Income, in response to the huge changes that artificial intelligence and robots are bringing to our workforce. UBI is where a government gives everyone an untaxable amount of money each month. There's no means testing, and it doesn't even matter if you've got a job or not. Instinctively, I have always been against this idea, but I'm increasingly worried about the effect of artificial intelligence on jobs and communities. Richard Branson thinks it's time for us to trial such a scheme, and I'm hesitantly finding myself warming to the idea. None of us know what the future holds, so we need to make sure we enter it with all options open.
Michelle, I notice this conversation is headlined Financing the Future.
Is it?
Yes. So who finances that financing? All of our taxation.
So, I'm imagining a world. So, by the way, I am a very strong believer in work ethic. I'm a very strong believer in supporting yourself and personal responsibility. So, for me to be edging towards agreeing with at least trialling a UBI, it's quite a wrench for me. So, like you, I have the questions such as, we're going to pay someone to do nothing, and who's going to fund this? I'm imagining a world many years from now where actually the workforce is very efficient, it's very effective, it's automated, it's an automated economy. There will be a lot of wealth being generated by such machines and robots for companies, for example. So we would be having to ask ourselves, how are we taxing this wealth? It would be taxing that wealth that is funding this proposal.
But you know these companies are incredibly adept at paying minimum tax. I won't name them for obvious reasons.
I certainly do, my friend, yeah.
So the idea that they're suddenly going to say, oh, look, have another 40%. It's never going to... Your suggestion, if we base it on the Finnish model, we'll be giving people 470 quid just to sit on their arses all week.
Exactly. Don't get me wrong. Instinctively, as I said in my intro, I've always been very, very opposed to this. But I am so worried about communities that are literally going to have their workforces, the jobs just wiped out. What do those people do? Because if they're not working because they've lost their jobs, then they'll be...
Don't we retrain them so they can service the drones?
Yes, but just let me answer that final point. Yes, we would retrain them, but automation will change the workforce at such speed we won't be able to train them in time.
Michelle is right, and I'm so happy to hear you saying this, Michelle. I think it's really enlightened. And I think even if everyone doesn't agree, because it is radical, it's exactly the kind of thinking we should be doing, because like you said, it's changing radically. Now, Nick, I can see your little grey cells trying to adapt as brave new world. Let me help you. Deloitte has said that 35% of jobs in the UK will disappear in the next 2 decades. Right. And previously, people thought that was going to be taxi drivers and manufacturing.
But there must be creation.
Yes, but the new jobs are going to be for robots, not for humans. That's what automation means. And that's why it is going to have such a radical social impact. So it is going to be lower income, lower skilled people who bear the disproportionate brunt of that change. But also doctors, journalists, lawyers. Watson, IBM's doctor. Now, you can imagine a robot that can scan every journal and every piece of research in seconds and diagnose
How is it a robot going to feel my bunions?
It's already made. Oh, God, that's quite an image.
Well, there we go. That's ridiculous to quote doctors.
Nick, this is what I'm saying.
Surgeons.
You're going to have to open your mind to imagine some of the things that are possible. Now, this is all exciting in the sense of how much more we can achieve, but the social implications are horrifying, because we are going to have millions of people out of work and unprecedented wealth concentrated in a few powerful companies.
Let's see some video of what you've just talked about in action now from the United States. Here's one of those in operation, and here we go. Here's a lovely young woman putting that in. Now, that would normally be the role of perhaps a taxi driver or a bloke or woman on a bicycle. Off it goes, down the street. Somebody's very hungry, crosses the road. That would be nicked in seconds. And there we are. Voila. And do you know what's been delivered?
Grab.
Yep. Burger and microchips. That's what he's having.
It's not a fresh liver or something for a transplant patient.
But actually, Nick, before I bring Rachel in, to counter your point, health tech is a huge industry, and actually people are investing in medical advancements and surgical procedures that would be done robotically in a lot of cases. So that is a huge industry that's being explored at the moment. And this is what I'm saying. We can't imagine what this future will look like at the moment because it's so alien to us. But, Rachel... You look confused at me.
Part of me agrees with you that we can't pay people for doing nothing. But I met a futurologist the other day at a breakfast, and he'd already done a spinning class, so, you know, I didn't really take him very seriously. But he said that actually we're sort of misunderstanding it, and it's going to be really high-end occupations that are going to be really done out of work, like the hedge funds, you know, the city, lawyers. Those are going to they're going to be able to use algorithms, but actually things like plumbers and dentists and things... Real people labour is going to carry on, he said, to an extent that hasn't been understood yet. But why don't we hear what the future is going to look like from the Tesla founder, Elon Musk?
What's going to happen is robots will be able to do everything better than us. I'm including, I mean, all of us, you know. When I say everything, like the robots will be able to do everything, bar nothing.
So he's basically saying that human beings are going to be redundant, all of us, and we're going to be taken over by robots.
Last year, I had lunch made by a robotic kitchen, which was... And I was reporting for Sky News. It was a kitchen that you would be able to, on your way home, you know, use your phone to say what you want for dinner, and you'll get home and your kitchen, which has robotic arms...
It's got a wife.
...will have made...
Joke. Joke.
Got it on the record.
No wonder I haven't got one. That's a joke.
Got it on the record.
He'll be replaced by a robot next week.
Okay, so maybe I'm missing something here, but I think if... Well, no, she just asked me the question. That's why I'm talking.
Go on.
Yeah?
What
I'm missing... Everyone gets income, even if they don't need it, yeah? Which means that you're taking... There is a pot of money to do this. So so that pot of money, you're taking a bit away and giving it to people who don't need it, and then the people who do need it, you know, people who don't have a job, who are on benefits, whatever, the people they're talking about who will be done out of jobs, they get the same as someone who's getting a wage. And if this is supposed to reduce poverty and inequality, it's actually going to increase it, because the people who have jobs and have money are going to get more. The people who don't are just going to get this basic amount.
They can still do stuff. The people that don't have a job can still create something, set up a business. They're not saying, you know, of course some randoms are going to sit there playing video games all day, but you can still do stuff. You don't have to just sit at home.
We're going to have to press standby on that conversation for now, because coming up after the break, it's me, and I'll be taking no prisoners when it comes to our jails. You're provided with your own phone, and you're given a laptop so you can pre-order all your meals from the comfort of your bed. It's also highly likely you'll soon be able to keep in touch with family and friends through special video technology too. Now, what do you suppose I'm talking about? A hotel, an airline's first or business class section? No. I've just been describing life inside one of our jails, Wayland, in Norfolk. This is simply ludicrous. A jail is a place for punishment and rehabilitation, not a gentleman's club. There are 105 prisoners in that jail serving life terms, so it's clear they will have committed some high-level offences, probably including murder or rape. Making life behind bars more comfortable than it is on the outside is, in itself, criminal. You may tit.
Sorry, Nick. I'm sorry.
Why they're laughing.
I don't know.
I can't. It's criminal to give somebody a device that's not linked to the internet to tell the poor prison warder what he wants for his dinner. By the way, Nick, you're on very, very sticky wicket, because today they released the figures for assaults in prisons, and 7,000 prison officers were assaulted last year to June, and the number of assaults and self-harming incidents has gone up to 21,000. So in my view, anything prison officers can do to make things quieter in prison, to keep prisoners happy and less violent, is all right by me.
Well, let's not lock the door at night, then. Why are we doing something so as inhumane as locking the door at night?
Nick, that's not my point at all. It's clear to me from your cue that you've actually, probably even when your kids were small, have never been in full 24-hour charge of an unruly toddler or a person, let alone a dangerous prisoner. Right. And if you were, you would be using every tool at your disposal.
So we
I'm not saying
feather
bed them. They're in prison. If this helps keep Wayland Prison, as the governor said, calmer, then what on earth are we complaining
Rachel,
about?
do you know in that prison, when they did an inspection of that prison, they found 500 litres of alcohol, which is enough to actually...
What's that got to do with the fact that you can order your dinner?
Well, because that's the point. They're ordering their own booze as well. They're not supposed to be drinking inside, and yet they can. They're taking drugs.
I'm afraid that's a separate problem.
Why is it separate?
Rachel, you can't...
They're not ordering alcohol from prison warders.
We're talking about the lifestyle that they have inside of prison,
Rachel, you can't run prisons on the back foot. What can we do to make prison... Now, I'm also saying you can't put them in a room with a flickering light bulb and tie them with... I'm not suggesting that for one second. But prison has to be seen. As much as it's rehabilitation, it is punishment. And there will be people watching this programme right now who would dream of being able to lie in their bed, order some food, have a phone right by their bed, and possibly video technology to their friends.
What, whilst deprived of their liberty?
Well, that's because they might have murdered...
That is the essential punishment.
Because... And we're talking lifers here. So you probably have murdered or been a rapist or probably... Now, obviously, they don't say who's in there for security reasons. They're not going to tell us who they are.
I'll deal with you in a second.
You'll deal with me in a second.
Can I just ask one question?
I'll look forward to being dealt with, obviously.
If this system did lead to, let's say, the halving of assaults... of assaults in prison, would you be in favour of it?
Well, let's come back to that.
Would you be in favour of it?
I want to say a few things. So, first of all, you're damn right you should be losing your liberties if you're in prison for killing someone or raping someone or anything like that. And to your point, I'm not sure how pressing a button to order a cheese sandwich at lunch is going to reduce assaults in prison. But what I would say is, in my former life, my teenage years were spent on a very big estate, and my then boyfriend was in and out of prison more times than a yo-yo was up and down. His brother was in prison, and very recently his sister has just been released from prison. I can't think of one of those people that I know that has not been in prison multiple times. They used to quite enjoy it in there. Most of their friends was in there. They certainly did not fear going back in there. So I know from personal experience, albeit many years ago, that a great number of people, and when you look at the reoffending rate, prison can't be that bad if people are really not that bothered about going back in it a second and third and fourth time. Prison absolutely should be an uncomfortable environment for you to be in. You should absolutely want to leave there, never want to see it ever again. Exactly. And Afua's shaking her head, and I'm sure you'll disagree with me, but prison is not supposed to be, I'm not going to use the word holiday camp because I think that's a bit thingy, but it's not supposed to be somewhere that you're chilling out in the comfort of pressing buttons and getting room service and all the rest of it. Not at all.
If prison is so comfortable, then why did we have 40,000 recorded, that's probably the tip of the iceberg, incidences of self-harm, 119 suicides last year, the highest number since 1978. Prison officers have been cut by a quarter. Now, when you talk about alcohol and other things being smuggled into prison, the real issue here is that we're not spending the money on our prisons to have them safe and secure. And most prisoners are not being rehabilitated. Education in prison is at an all-time low in the last 3 decades. So the things that would meaningfully rehabilitate prisoners are not happening. The things that should keep them safe, because even though we all agree prison is about punishment, I would be really amazed if any of you, even Carole, thinks that it's OK for prisoners to be so depressed and uncared for that they're self-harming or attempting suicide.
Do you know what I really care about? If I was a victim of one of these guys in this prison, if I had been raped by them or beaten up by them, or if someone I loved had been killed by one of them, I would be incandescent with rage. More time and effort is spent on these men, on the criminals, than is spent on the victims. You know, someone who has been hurt by one of these people sees this, they hear that they have phones, that they have iPads, that they're buying luxuries in prison, they're able to order their meals whenever they want. I would be horrified. More time is spent on these people than on the victims of crime. And you're talking about courses and rehabilitation stuff. There are lots of courses for prisoners. There's not that many things around out there for the victims of crime.
It's a zero-sum game. I'm not saying we should ignore victims of crime and give prisoners
luxury. Well, you've not mentioned a victim once in all of this. You're talking about how sorry you feel for the prisoners.
These are going to be released into society, where if they're not rehabilitated, there will be more victims, Carole, and we all care about
the person, without being in any way rude, but the person clearly is closest to us, I would suggest, out of the 5 of us, is Michelle from her former life. If your former boyfriend or his brother or sister, if life in jail had been tough, and I don't mean brutal, I don't mean anything illegal, but, you know, you get up at 6 in the morning and you, I don't know, mop out the loos or whatever it might be, do you think that might have had any effect? Or what effect might that have...
My ex-boyfriend loved it, because he used to, I'm not even kidding, when he used to get sent to prison, and more fool me...
And do you mind when I ask what sort of offences?
A variety of different things.
Theft.
He's been in and out of prisons more times than I've had hot dinners, but for him, he used to say, listen, he gets bulked up, he used to go to the gym every single day because he couldn't afford a gym membership when he was out. So he used to go to the gym every single day, he used to eat well, he used to hang out with all of his mates during the social time. He genuinely had no problem being in that institution.
That's a problem too. I mean, clearly our prisons are not working. Just look at recidivism rates. You look at the amount of reoffending, and you look at the fact that 47% of prisoners have no qualifications and a third have learning difficulties. Something's going wrong.
Life should not be comfortable. But life should not be comfortable.
I've worked in prisons, Carole, and my experience, I'm not in any way negating Michelle's experience, but my experience of spending time in prison, with prisoners, they are not
You've just heard her say that he had a better life inside probably than he had outside.
I was his girlfriend on the outside, so probably wanted to get away with me.
It was where he got his respite from. He went. But I think we have to allow the prison authorities to explain why they're doing this. And the facts are the prison population has doubled, and prisons are twice as crowded as they used to be since just as recently as 1993. And what they are saying is that This is the statement from a prison service spokeswoman. She says, "We're committed to improving prison safety, and we know that giving offenders phones in their cells with strict security measures and pre-approved phone numbers reduces violence and lowers self-harm. It also frees up prison officers to spend more time on the front line keeping prisons secure." Now,
and what she didn't say was when they get the phones and they're on those
they're pre-planned. They've got pre-logged numbers.
But when they're on the phones and they're in their cells, and this was a bit of research that was done recently, they actually don't do the work that they're supposed to do in prison. They just spend all day in the cell on the phone.
Well, when I hear that, I can't help but wonder if this, what you're talking about, giving them access to this technology, is really about the fact that prisons are massively understaffed.
Of course, it's management.
It's not designed to make prisoners' lives better or more luxurious.
But
it's to save money because prisons are not being funded properly, and that is the real issue here. We have the highest rates of imprisonment in Europe, and it's not working.
The word discipline would sort all this out, rather than... and again, fairly implemented discipline. I don't mean anything illegal, but going back to... And what I can't work out is we so regularly cull people from our armed forces who are men and women who understand discipline, who understand giving orders, who understand how to take orders, and we're crying out for people to join the prison service. Why don't we make the hook that at least they could be offered the opportunity, providing they pass the relevant tests, and just get a degree of discipline? Again, fairly implemented. Then you won't need these damn laptops. Then you'll get, and you won't get the booze that we've heard about. You won't get the laptops.
Exactly. And bring back national service.
No,
do you know what percentage of...
You see, that's a typical liberal reaction.
Do you know what percentage of people in the criminal justice system?
I'm in favour of it. I think it's a great idea. Of course I do. I'd love it.
Anyway,
I think it'd be
that's
brilliant.
a debate for another time. Coming up after the break.
Yeah, I love it.
I will be... Are you listening, guys?
Sorry, I'm just...
Making a confession about my childhood.
Oh.
You may not know this about me, but as a child, I was overweight. It's not surprising. I'd gone from being a sporty child to an apathetic teenager with a very sweet tooth. I was self-conscious about my body, and having to go to the GP to be weighed, it's mortifying even to remember now, and told I needed to lose weight only made it worse. So when I saw the advice that we should be more careful in the language we use to overweight children, I could immediately relate. Public Health England says we should avoid the word obese and talk to children in more positive terms, like lifestyle and healthier weight status. The backlash has, I'm looking at Carole, already begun. But 1 in 3 children now leaves primary school obese or overweight. And years of sending home dreaded fat letters to parents stigmatising obesity has done nothing to solve the problem. Children's bodies are the symptoms, not the cause, of our failure as a society to produce and market healthier food and more active lifestyles. It's bad enough they're paying the price. The least we can do is treat them with care.
As you say to me every week, dear. Okay. We do not stigmatise overweight kids. We do the opposite. We mollycoddle overweight kids. We lie to them. We pretend that they don't have a problem. And you're talking about this alternatively sized and healthier weight status. That's just nonsense. It's not... You don't tell the child they're overweight. You tell the parents that they're overweight because it's the parents' fault. When a kid is young, kids don't go to the supermarket and buy junk food. They're not the ones who feed themselves. Their parents feed them. And, for me, for a parent putting their head in the sand and not seeing that their child is dangerously overweight... I mean, you said before, 1 in 3 kids leave primary school obese. 1 in 10 leave dangerously overweight, and that's primary school. Now, parents should be told in no uncertain terms that by not getting their kids to eat healthily, they're lining them up for a life of heart disease, of osteoporosis, of arthritis, diabetes, another one, lung disease, breathing problems, all of these things. This is what they're doing to their child. For me, it's tantamount to child abuse. When I see parents with really overweight kids, I feel desperate for the kids because all they're doing is eating what their mum and dad give them. So for me, that is one problem. Secondly, Public Health England and all the other organisations in the NHS that say they want to tackle obesity, they don't want to tackle it at all. They want to pander to people. We cater for obesity now. People who are fat fat. It's no one's fault. It's no one's responsibility. It's just a problem that's said. No, it's not. It happens because you eat too much and don't exercise enough. I speak. You were once a fat person. I am a fat person, and I know exactly why I'm overweight, and I know exactly what to do to solve it. And it's not a disease. It's not an addiction. It's an self-inflicted condition which we could solve ourselves.
I think Nick's keen to come in. Before he does, I just want to contextualise what is going wrong here, because it's actually not as extreme what has to happen for a child to be overweight as you might think. So here I've got some fruit shoots.
Yeah.
These are things that specifically I can speak from first-hand experience appeal to children.
Yeah.
17% sugar in one bottle.
You can read. People can read.
It's one of your 5 a day. How can it be?
It also says on it, it says as well, it's got schools compliant. Don't know what that means. Look at this cute little Freddo.
Oh, I love Freddo.
Do you know
I
how
love
much?
Freddo.
10 grams of sugar. Now, if a child...
that,
you can have that after the show, Michelle, leading by example. And if a child has one fruit shoot and one of these in a day, that is the entire allowance of sugar for a 7 to 14-year-old for a day. Just that, let alone all this other stuff that kids love. Frosties, another one of my personal favourites. And this... I used to eat these in the 80s and they're still going. Dib-Dab, it's basically pure sugar. Each pack has 18 grams of sugar. That's almost the entire intake in itself.
The kids are... It's not an accident if they eat that. It's because on the back of every packet it says... I think what would be better if manufacturers put a teaspoon on the back of the packet and said 6 teaspoons of sugar, because I don't know what 6 grams looks like. I've got no idea. But that would be shocking. You know, in the same way, do you remember with cigarettes? People, when we put the price of cigarettes up, people still bought them. When we started putting pictures of rotting lungs and cancerous throats, it became a naff thing to do, to smoke, and that's what we need to do.
I want to bring everyone else in, but I just want to say, Carole, I mean, we basically agree, but what I'm saying is that the language that you use is important, because if you tell kids that their parents are obese, the parents tell the kids that they're obese.
No,
and
they
it
don't.
Ends up
They don't have to.
What we're doing now is not working, Carole, because we still have one of the highest rates of obesity in Europe.
But it's not working because we don't tackle it head on.
We do.
We're too scared.
We send
too much
fat
political
letters home
correctness
to
about
parents.
fat.
Let's just see, because I think, Carole, we need... You say that the NHS doesn't... Well, Public Health England doesn't want to tackle obesity. I think they probably do. This is what they say. Public Health England. Take care with the language you use. Keep it as positive as possible and focus on terms such as healthier weight status and healthier lifestyle. Terms such as obese are not generally well accepted by parents/carers when talking about their child's weight. Public health... In one second. And I think, again, you're both right, actually, here, because... You can't call children fat or obese.
Not to their faces.
No, but equally you can't use expressions such as, what is this, a healthier weight status. No. It has to be, both sides have to be feathered, because if you, and I choose this expression to be, if you sugarcoat the message, you won't get through to the child. You really won't, and that's
can
what
I just
you have
say,
to
if someone had cancer, you wouldn't dream of not telling them they had cancer. You wouldn't pussyfoot around it. You would tell them. If someone is overweight, you have to tell them, no, they're not. They're both killers.
The difference is...
They're both killers.
That if you're overweight, you can heal yourself by being healthy.
Exactly.
And that's why talking about a healthier lifestyle...
But we've done that.
...is the solution. No, we're not doing it.
We've been doing that for...
That's what this is about, Carole. I don't know if you heard what I said, but NHS England is saying we should move away from talking about obesity to moving towards
2 years ago said the same thing.
focusing on what they can do about it, which is to be healthier.
Nice 2 years ago said exactly the same thing.
But parents do need to use their own brains as well, don't they? Yeah. If you've got a kid that is, you know, on the big side, to put it nicely, if you keep pumping it full of stuff like that, the child is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you do need to be saying to the parent, look, do you realise that if your child continues to be overweight, it's going to get, or the child has the potential to have, you know, the diabetes, this, that and the other. Because maybe a lot of parents don't realise that they're going to create potentially those, you know, chronic illnesses going forward. But if you're a parent who has an overweight or obese child and you do keep providing sweets and treats like that, you know, you are in the wrong.
I mean, I can tell you which parents are affected most, because in the most affluent areas, 11% of 11-year-olds are obese or overweight, and in the most deprived areas, it's 26%.
But Can I just counter that? There was a Leeds Metropolitan University did the biggest study of its kind on obese kids. 14,000 children over 3 years they looked at, and they completely contradict what you said. They have said that the children in the middle affluent areas of Leeds were more likely to be very overweight than those in the very poor or the very wealthy postcode areas. That completely blows that myth
it doesn't, because what I've given you is a national statistic, not about Leeds, but it's not an
14,000
argument, Michelle.
children. 14,000
It's a statistic that in the country as a whole, a quarter of 11-year-olds from the most deprived areas are overweight. I was not from a deprived area, and I was overweight. I'm not saying only people from poor backgrounds
are. Not calling a fat child fat is going to solve the problem. It's to do with the fast food. It's to do with the availability of food. It's to do with large.
This
giant
stuff, by the way,
bars
is
of
cheap.
Cadbury milk at checkout, given away with your Daily Telegraph. Other newspapers are available. It's all of those things. When I was probably your age, I mean, my mum, we all lived in Belgium, and my mother took us all to the doctor, and the doctor said, Mrs. Johnson, all your children are fat. I don't know what he said, gros, ils sont tous gros, or something like that. And we were put on skimmed milk. So we were told, to our faces we were fat, and we were told we had to cut down.
And look at you now.
And it sort of works.
You can't... Did you have problems with your children?
Well, I think as a mother, and I think you lose the argument as soon as you say as a mother, it is so much harder than you think, Carole, to try... Because you can't control everything they eat. They go to school, they have pocket money, they go to friends' houses. You know, you have to try... It's all about healthy eating lessons, but it's also about... the manufacturers and the retailers taking responsibility for this crisis as well.
But everything in your house and everything you give your kids for packed lunches, I am sure, does not contain all that sugar. And I think that's responsible parenting, to make sure that's not what you're giving your kids.
Can I have that Freddo, please?
Right.
Got Michelle's
totally irresponsible eating.
It's time. And it's a hard life being a political pet. Constantly on parade, fawned over by bored journalists and over-friendly world leaders, and expected to behave with decorum at all times. Well, one pooch has put his paw down.
J'ai regardé aussi avec la ministre des Transports pour travailler sur la question de la mobilité du futur notamment.
De faire un truc assez...
Quel est ce bruit?
Yes, that's right. Nemo, French President Emmanuel Macron's dog, decided a fireplace in the Élysée Palace could do with a little extra sprinkling during a meeting his owner was having with ministers. For cocking one leg to protocol, Nemo, you're our straight shooter of the week.
At least he did it in the fireplace.
No one said anything. They just kind of...
No, they all laughed.
What I like is that Michelle Barnier is asked to borrow him when they next meet David Davis.
Right. We better leave it there before one of my fellow panellists decides to do a Nemo next. See you next time.
Provocative. Straight talking. Fairness. Provocative. Straight talking.